What you're seeing is some opportunistic selling. And as we come around to the beginning of the year, as post-inauguration, when things start actually put in place, we'll start seeing it run again. I think the majority of the people who look at Bitcoin price are expecting a correction into the low 90s, high 80s, and then a return to growth, ending somewhere approaching 200,000 by the end of next year.
Fred Thiel highlights that despite Bitcoin's record-breaking performance, there's a cautious optimism among buyers. At $108,000, every Bitcoin in circulation was either at break-even or in profit. This milestone reflects a robust market, but it also invites selling pressure. Many investors, especially those with significant profits, are likely to cash out, anticipating a price correction. Thiel notes that this pattern often coincides with year-end activities where profit-taking is common. As the market recalibrates post-inauguration, Thiel expects renewed growth. He predicts Bitcoin prices could dip into the high $80,000 or low $90,000 before resuming an upward trajectory, potentially reaching $200,000 by the end of next year. This projection underscores the cyclical nature of Bitcoin's price movements and the influence of broader economic and political developments.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
I think what you're seeing is there is no lack of demand on the sidelines. What you're seeing, though, is very prudent buyers. You had, as of a few weeks ago, every single Bitcoin in existence was in profit. When you had Bitcoin at $108,000, every single Bitcoin anybody held, no matter what price they paid for it, it was either break even or in profit. And if you think about back in August, when we did our first convert to buy Bitcoin in this year, we ended up doing 3 of them. Bitcoin was at 55,000. And here you are at 108,000. That's almost 100% profit. And so there's going to be selling pressure. So you have people towards the end of the year, they're going to sell off some of their Bitcoin holdings and potentially buy back into the market when it drops down. I think a lot of people were expecting some sort of correction post-election. It seems that, everything that the administration is saying today, tends to indicate that they're going to follow through on their commitments regarding Bitcoin and strategic reserve, et cetera. So I think what you're seeing is some opportunistic selling. And as we come around to the beginning of the year, as post-inauguration, when things start actually put in place, we'll start seeing it run again. I think the majority of the people who look at Bitcoin price are expecting a correction into the low 90s, high 80s, and then a return to growth, ending somewhere approaching 200,000 by the end of next year. I think that's a pretty valid scenario, just based on the demand that we're seeing kind of on the sidelines. If a strategic reserve is announced, that'll drive a relatively big push. If other countries start announcing reserves, again, there's a finite supply of Bitcoin, right? There are only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. 20 million more or less have been mined. And of that, maybe 4 million are in wallets that either have keys that are lost or inaccessible for other reasons, or just won't move, 1 million of which is in the Satoshi wallet itself. So there's not a lot of Bitcoin to go around. And, if countries want to have 500,000 Bitcoin or, equivalent, 500,000 Bitcoin, you think about it, that's roughly what MicroStrategy has, right? So now you're talking roughly, $50 billion of Bitcoin. That's not a very big reserve for a country. And so you start adding up those demands on supply, and it's a big number. And then you look at pension funds that want to put 1% or 2% into Bitcoin, and you see the growth of the ETFs. The Bitcoin ETFs in 12 months have grown to have more assets under management than gold ETFs took 20 years to accumulate. Putin said at the recent BRICS meeting that he wanted the BRICS countries to be able to trade outside of the dollar system, and he mentioned Bitcoin was a good alternative, which is why you start seeing now those countries looking at Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. Donald Trump has also said that he wants the BRIC countries to continue to trade in dollars. What wasn't said is that I think there's a likelihood that you could trade in digital dollars, like Tether, for example. And I think what you'll see is stable coins take on a bigger and bigger role in payments, especially cross-border payments, because they're obviously much more efficient than the Fed. They're easier to get, easier to dispose of, et cetera. So what you'll see is some countries just starting to hold Bitcoin. You have Bhutan, which is a very small country that has a very big reserve relative to its population. El Salvador, obviously, everybody's familiar with. But now you're starting to see countries, but not just countries. You're seeing states. The state of Texas has a bill that's been submitted to the legislature to have a strategic reserve. Louisiana, I believe, also has done that. So you're now seeing more and more states looking at this as being a valid thing. You're seeing commercial banks refinancing commercial building loans where they put a strip of Bitcoin as a way to essentially balance for volatility, because from a risk-adjusted perspective, if you have 2% of Bitcoin in a portfolio or in a basket that makes up a loan, you can dramatically positively impact the return potentially, which can offset some volatility risk in the value of the underlying commercial asset that you're refinancing. So I think we're starting to really see Bitcoin come into the financial system. You're starting to see Bitcoin derivative instruments starting to happen. People like BlackRock and others are very active in building all sorts of other products on top of it. So I'm very bullish.
Thiel advocates for the U.S. to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Drawing parallels with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, he argues that such a reserve could serve multiple purposes, including stabilizing markets and exerting geopolitical influence. The U.S. government could leverage its confiscated Bitcoin holdings, currently estimated at 200,000 coins, as a foundation for this reserve. Expanding the reserve would require congressional appropriation. Thiel references Senator Cynthia Lummis's proposal to allocate funds for purchasing additional Bitcoin. This initiative could involve buying 200,000 Bitcoin annually over 5 years, ultimately creating a reserve of 1 million coins.
We have a gold reserve. Why do we have a gold reserve? It's certainly not to back the US dollar, because the US dollar is not backed by gold. So we have a gold reserve as a way that we have the ability to pay for things in the event the dollar would be somehow locked out of a market or fully debased. And so why would you have a Bitcoin reserve? Well, if countries start trading using Bitcoin for international settlement, or they use it as a reserve asset, the U.S. needs to have an ability to affect those markets. And if the U.S. holds enough Bitcoin, they can essentially either support or have a threat of attacking a market by using Bitcoin as a strategic weapon. We have a strategic oil reserve today that was created as a response to the 1970s oil crisis and the oil embargo, as a way to protect this country from people keeping us out of getting oil. And today it's just used as a mechanism for leveling pricing in the oil markets domestically. But internationally, if we have a Bitcoin strategic reserve, we can impact Bitcoin price. We can impact people's ability to use Bitcoin. This is also why Bitcoin mining is so important. Think of Bitcoin mining as block space. You need to have block space to be able to process transactions. The more mining that exists outside the US, the more outside nations have the opportunity to block the US from putting transactions into those blocks. Right? It's kind of like airplane capacity. There are only so many seats in every block, and there's a block every 10 minutes. And if the US only has 10% of global hash rate, US transactions could only be guaranteed to be processed in 10% of the cases. Right? So it's very important for the US to have a significant amount of block space, somewhere upwards of 40%, such that no nation can lock US Bitcoin holders or investors, especially the large institutional investments that are coming into this country to invest in Bitcoin. So they can't be locked out of the market. So you have to have both the strategic reserve and a large amount of mining in the country to make sure that you can back that. There are two ways it would be done. One is by executive order, the president could order all Bitcoin held by the US government that's been confiscated and held by law enforcement agencies and other departments, prohibit it from being sold and being contributed to a central fund that would be managed by the Treasury Department, for example. Then if you wanted, and that's about 200,000 Bitcoin. If you wanted to go beyond that and actually go out and purchase more Bitcoin, now you need to have appropriation for that. And so this is part of the bill that Senator Lummis put forth, which is about essentially creating appropriation. Congress would essentially fund the purchase of, I think it's 200,000 Bitcoin per year over a period of 5 years to build a reserve of 1 million Bitcoin. So that's another way. Then there are other ways. You could allocate, for example, that certain capital held by the Social Security funds and other similar funds that are managed by Treasury, that you could say, okay, you need to allocate 2% of those to Bitcoin, and we'll consider that part of our strategic reserve. So there are lots of different ways they can do it. I think it's really going to come down to Congress's appetite for doing something like this. Either other nations are going to beat the U.S. to it, or the U.S. is going to be first. I think there's a high likelihood that it's going to be an active item on the agenda, and we'll have to see where it goes. But I'm positively inclined to think that it'll go through in some form or another. It may be as small as the 200,000 Bitcoin I mentioned that the president could authorize to be put into this fund, or it could be bigger. We'll just have to see.
Bitcoin mining is not just about creating new coins. It's about securing block space for transactions. Thiel likens this to airline seat availability. Only so many transactions can be processed in each 10-minute block. If the U.S. holds a small share of global hash power, its transactions could be marginalized. Thus, maintaining a substantial hash rate is essential for national security and economic sovereignty.
Please like and subscribe my channel.